Welcome everybody to this weekend's project. Today we're going to be putting on a chicken house door. Basically we converted this old woodshed over to a chicken house. I've got my suspended water and feeder. Now it's time to build a door.
So the frame of the door was built, and the frame was built like so. This is the skin right here that we'll put on top of it, and the door latch right here is actually going to be a sliding pin, so that when that is pushed, that comes out. Pull it back, and it's flush. Pull the pin, and it's ready to go. This part right here will have a pin in it, so that when you grab onto it, it'll go back and forth, and we'll go ahead and see how that works for us.
A lot of this project was making it up as I went along. I had a lot of fun with it. The idea being here is that I wanted to secure this wood top to the frame I had made. The frame was pretty simple construction. At the end of the day, all it was 2x4s, and they were green, so unfortunately they will take a little while to dry out. And then I attached each joint area with a lag screw. Pretty simple, really. They were a 6-inch lag screw that went all the way through the 2x4 and into the next board. Pretty secure, and then of course the plywood on top will allow for any shear strength. The rest of it was just figuring out how I was going to do it. Most of these marks that you're seeing me apply here were so that I would know where the center of the 2x4 was at all times. I had to go all the way around it, placing in screws, dodging chickens of course, and pre-syncing all of my cuts so that everything would sit recessed just a little bit. I wanted those screws to be out of the way. The screws that I used were basically just 2-inch construction screws. They had a beveled top to them, which is the reason why I wanted them to recess just a little bit, but they actually work really well. It's often common for folks to try to use things like sheetrock screws and things like that, but I wanted something that was going to go ahead and be strong. They're also zinc coated so that they resist corrosion as well. The next step of this was to actually start working on the door lock mechanism. This part, I had a vague idea of what I wanted to do. I knew I needed to build a channel for that to sit in, so step one was to find myself a bit. Decided 1 inch was going to be the best way to go. Also, if later on I wanted to use something like a 1-inch pipe instead of the dowel I wanted to use, then I could go ahead and put that in there. So basically at this point I place in 2 holes. Those are going to be each end of the slide, so that when I actually want to start cutting out this piece, I'll have a reference point. I did miss out on the opportunity to show how I made that door latch there. It really wasn't all that hard. I set the guard on my table saw to 1/2 inch and just worked my way down each side of the board, and then used a hand saw to trim off the rest. Sanded it down a little bit, and it's pretty straightforward. At this point I've almost got my channel set up, so it's looking like I want it to, and I was happy to see that it was basically falling in line with my plan. The next step would be to create a guard on the back. I needed that piece of wood there so that the handle or the latch would not fall out the other side, obviously just giving it something to slide up against. Securing this plate was much like the rest of the construction, basically just going ahead and doing some presets with the drill bit and then sinking in some screws to hold it in place. keep up with the theme of making it up as I went along, now it was time to figure out what I was going to use as a door lock, or actually I guess as a door handle here. Basically, I needed something that was going to operate just like my fingers doing. And so I noticed that there was a dowel in the stuff that I had laying around. Figured that was as good as anything. It's probably time for a little dose of honesty. The wood glue did not work. Wood glue is awesome, but it just wasn't strong enough to hold it in place. It did offer some resistance, so the dowel really won't fall out, but I will have to rethink how I want it to be permanently set. At this point, I can actually take the dowel out, and it kind of operates as a lock, I guess, because you can't get into it unless you use your finger. So anyways, always back to the drawing board, but it worked for now. The next part of the project was mounting the window. This didn't have a whole lot of rules and criterion as far as having to figure out how I was going to put that in place. I just knew that it needed to be butted up against the plate of the door. I really wasn't going to build a frame for it, so I figured what I would do is I would cut out a hole that was about a ½ inch smaller than all the way around the window, and then I would just screw the window to the back of it. You'll be able to see the window somewhat floating there from the back when the door is open, but hey, it's a chicken house door. Boy, do I sure love my worm drive saw. This one's pretty neat because it actually has guard graduations on there that tell you how deep your blade is, ½ inch, ¾ inch plywood, 2x4 or whatever. So I set it up to a low depth so it would just go through the plywood. And then what I would do was finish off my cuts at the ends, here in just a moment, with a handsaw. This part was pretty simple, just placed it underneath the sawhorse and tried to make sure that it was as square as I could possibly get it inside the hole that I had created. My constant companion throughout this project was always looking over my shoulder, making sure that I was getting his door just right.
Down.
You guessed it, more of the same. Making sure that the countersinks were in place, and then screwing that window in. Really wasn't that complicated. Didn't come out too bad, if I do say so myself. I used my router to bevel out the sides, just to make sure there was no sharp edges and give me something to sand to. Somewhere along the way, my GoPro ran out of disk space, so I wasn't able to capture us mounting the door. Let me tell you, that door's a little bit heavy. It took me and my wife to get that thing in place, but there she is. There was another thing that I wasn't able to show you that I made, and that was the door handle. I made the door lock, I showed you that part, but the handle was something that I really wanted on there so that you could open the door without having to pull on that dowel. As I said, it doesn't stick very well. So this is a 2x4 with a plywood side plate on it. The 2x4 had a pretty wide grain on it, I was kind of worried about it eventually breaking, and I wanted something to reinforce it. So I put some plywood there and secured it down with some lag bolts. All in all, I think it turned out all right. Then it was time to start sanding and staining. This process wasn't too complicated, just had to make sure I sanded down all my putty and my pencil marks, and then I applied a dark chestnut stain.
Well, here it is, Sunday night. Like most projects that start on a Friday evening, it's time to put this one to bed and move on, get ready for the week. So at this point, we've got our stain applied. This is going to dry over the next 10 hours or so. It is oil-based, so it's going to give it a nice protection from the rain and moisture. Once this dries, I will be putting on a urethane coating to cover it, seal it in, to make sure it's truly protected from the elements. Right now, I can't stain the back side of this because, as I mentioned before, that is green lumber. It is not going to take stain and needs to dry out, so we'll seal all the way around it. And the good news is that I'm going to be here a while, so I'll be able to dive back into this project once that wood does dry out. We'll get it sanded down, fully sealed off, and make it complete. This has been a lot of fun. This project allowed me to do some of the things that I wanted to do as far as the overall theme of this chicken house. I wanted to make it something rustic, simple, not just a manufactured piece that you might buy over the counter. This mechanical door lock was fun to make, and I was able to incorporate one of the old windows. This is a, what do you call that, a single pane poured glass from the 1920s that came out of the old farmhouse, and I was able to use that. Once all this dries up, we'll get this all cleaned up and it'll look pretty spiffy. So that was a lot of fun and looking forward to the next project. Thanks for watching.